Muskrat Falls is a mega project filled with controversy. So the former premier of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. William, he was a little bit away, and silent for a few years after the project started in 2012. And then he came back, in 2017 to say,
it's a strategic investment. Is it over time? Yes. Is it over budget? Yes. But that's the very nature of mega projects.
He definitely sounds like him, more or less. So how many times have you heard politicians talking about mega projects like this? Are mega projects doomed to fail? My name is Daniela. This is Gustavo. Unfortunately, Gabriel couldn't be here today with us. And we are going to talk today about the lessons learned of the mega project Muskrat Falls. So what is Muskrat Falls? This project originally was 6.2 billion projects in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador mainly, and it included a generation facility, a maritime transmission link, and also the Labrador Island transmission link. So it will be basically, aside of the facility, to have a new route to sell additional power or surplus power to Nova Scotia. And on the other hand, we will create no more dependency from Quebec power, since we were selling, just a surplus to Quebec. So this project was plagued, and still, you can watch it on the news, it's plagued with many issues. The first one is the coast creep. Then the schedule overrun. So we were supposed to have the first power in 2017, and now it's projected to 2020, hopefully. Then several conflicts with First Nations. And finally, the energy will cost more. As a matter of fact, it will cost actually double due to this.
So let's get into the lessons learned. The first one, so researchers have been talking about what is called the iron law of mega projects, being over budget, over cost, over time, over and over again. This was actually presented by Brent Flyberg, who, by the way, it was the first witness on the current public inquiry that's going on the Muskrat Falls project. So common causes are uniqueness bias. So the project managers tend to think that their project is too unique, and there are no lessons to be drawn from similar projects. And the planning fallacy, which is what we end up doing as project managers, and this is very common, that we humans tend to think that things will go out better than they expect to, or they expect to be better than what would actually happen. So to counter that, there are some measures, basically using data from previous projects, and there is a very interesting initiative, as one example, the Green Book used by the United Kingdom that sets contingencies, adjustments for the planning fallacy for both cost and duration. So if we compare here, Muskrat Falls had a contingency of only 13.5%, which is not feasible for a mega project like this. So the first lesson, use similar projects as reference, so data from the past when setting your contingency, and account for optimism bias when setting it.
Lesson 2. Please. Okay, these images, they're all over the news. They were all over the news. And this is about the conflicts with the Nunatsiavut government. So the Nunatsiavut government is located, basically, people are located downstream of the dam. And they were not consulted of many of the conditions, that they will get, during the construction of the dam. So they went to University of Harvard, and they asked, to develop a study regarding the potential impact of methyl mercury in downstream water quality. And they found that there was a significant potential. They will definitely increase enormously after they do the flooding of the area. So there was a huge lack of response by Nalcor, which is the energy company owner of this project, and this led to protests in 2016. So nevertheless, the area flooded in 2017 as expected for this kind of projects, and with minimal clearing of the trees, of the soil, etc. And this caused a high increment in the methyl mercury levels. We're talking about more than 90% of what was expected. So definitely, there was a poor stakeholder management. So the conflicts were ineffectively addressed. The claims were often unsettled and dismissed, and the conflicts still continue. So the consequence, for sure, schedule delays and cost increase. Therefore, the lesson learned to manage engagement and expectations of stakeholders properly throughout the entire project.
For the third lesson, we'll go back to a basic concept that we all project managers are accustomed to, is earned value management, which compares the actual work done versus the planned work for the project. So it was set as the primary reporting method when the feasibility study was created in 1999. However, was not implemented thoroughly the project. So the reports were only available for a few contractors, and this project had many contractors, so the overall reports were incomplete. No thresholds were set for deviations. And one example that not using the correct method for earned value management was the concrete placement. The concrete contract had man hours way of paying instead of cubic meters of concrete placed. So the latest Ernst & Young report from 2017 states that there have been improvements since the new management takeover, but this is still an area of concern on this project. So very basic lesson here, used and earned value progress for reporting the project status, so against the scope, cost, and schedule.
4. So if there's an area that we considered was deeply overlooked in this project was the risk management area. So the cost and the schedule overrun directly and indirectly is related to how NALCOR was unable to respond to all the identified risks. So as an example, in 2016, the contingency reserves only represent 2.4% of the total cost of the project. But at the time, more than 60% of the project was yet to be completed. It's not that we didn't have, references to set up these contingency reserves. They just gave us this value. So then the schedule impacts and potential costs arising were not integrated into the project forecast. So kind of an optimistic. So there was an optimist bias that could have been addressed if a higher uplift had been added. A risk owner, finally, should have been assigned to look after this. So the lesson learned number 4 is cost and schedule impacts of individual risks must be reflected in the overall reported forecast.
So going to the 5th lesson, Muskrat Falls was a very complex project. Over 400 people in project management staff alone, and most of them were not direct hires from NALCOR, the provincial energy company. So NALCOR was solely responsible for oversight of the project, and they set a project control management plan that was set for integrating all the schedules of costs and suppliers. However, the progress of many third-party companies were not integrated in the schedule and not systematically updated. So the data would be created in different ways, and there was mismatch of different systems that would not lead to an automated integration of the schedules. So improvements have been made lately, but this is still also an issue of concern. So what is important here that from the beginning of the project, especially when you have multiple stakeholders involved, you have to define a comprehensive and standardized one single way of reporting cost and schedule for the complete project structure.
6. So different stakeholders require different levels of communication. So this is Ernst & Young Audit Report. It was hired by the Oversight Committee, which was formed in 2014 to make some audits. So they deliver approximately 3 reports publicly, And in one of them, it says, stated that the level of detail provided in some reports were excessive for an executive level audience. And secondly, sometimes the timing of delivery does not serve the needs of the stakeholder group. So how to communicate with stakeholders? So we have to improve the overall project performance with proper communication, addressing all the different levels of details in different reports. We have to engage with stakeholders early to outline reporting templates for each stakeholder involved. A project management team must be able to report on the status of the project in real time. And well, if we cannot do it, at least near real-time information. So the lesson learned 6, tailored reports shall be provided on time for different levels of stakeholders.
So finally, the last lesson. Let's go back to the budget of the project. When it was originally sanctioned in 2012, the cost was announced to be $6.2 billion. When first concerns started arising in 2015, Ernst & Young was hired for the first time to review the project, and they found that the already increased budget of $7.7 billion was unfeasible. Currently, Nowcore is working with a $10.2 billion budget, and that's excluding inflation and interest, capital costs, that leads up to $12.7 billion. So what happened here? There were no thresholds for variation. So no for overall costs or schedule creep, and not for individual sub-projects. So if, as I just mentioned, the concrete placement, it went over budget, and no threshold would allow for an early identification of that. Delays or cost overruns were reported late, after the fact, so no preemptive measures here. And there was lack of integration, as we talked about, of sub-projects scheduled and budget to overall project reporting. So not only not having the thresholds was a problem, but also since you cannot have the prompt information from different different contractors together, it's even harder to set the overall thresholds and see if you are doing well for the whole project. So this impaired risk mitigation and reaction. So finally, lesson number 7, define your thresholds for variance reporting and escalation. So recapping everything, the first lesson, use similar projects as a reference for cost and schedule when you set the contingency and account for optimism bias. If there is one lesson that we would like you to remember, it's this one. Optimism bias can doom your project, and you can account to it using data from previous projects. Management engagement and expectations from different stakeholders properly throughout the entire project. Use earned value progress for reporting. The cost, schedule, and impacts of individual risks must be reflected in the overall report and forecasts. Comprehensive and standardized project reporting shall be defined early in the project for the complete project structure. Tailored reports shall provide on-time information for different levels, for different stakeholders. So you have one set of level of reporting for top management and different levels for different groups. The thresholds for variance and management, reporting and escalation shall be defined early in the project as well. So overall, you can apply this to any project. You remember, this is not only about Muskrat Falls. You can use this in everything you are working on. So that's our presentation for today. We are really happy to take any questions from you.
Excellent, thank you. 30 seconds ahead of schedule. Very good. This wasn't a mega project, I guess.
Wow.
Okay, questions from the audience, judges and or audience members, yes?
I'm just curious because because we focus so much on reporting and, you know, going back and using previous history and stuff like that. I wonder if you could comment on the size and the nature of the number of contractors. What were some of the people issues that arose?
Well, one of the people issues that we see is lack of transparency on communication, and this affects the whole project. Just yesterday I was reading one news about this project that the Vice President of Finance from Nalcor was kept out of the loop of the cost all the way to 1 week before the project was sanctioned. So if you cannot communicate within your own company, how can you communicate properly with stakeholders and with not only stakeholders, contractors involved, but also with people affected by it, like the First Nations and the Nunatsiavut Nation. So this had terrible effects throughout the whole project, and yes, communication was a big issue.
Great presentation. So as you indicated, stakeholder communication is very important. In Canada, more specifically, engaging with our Indigenous communities is something that we face a lot in the mining industry in the world that I work in. And you know, it's something that our mining industry and our industries in general are continuing to improve on and get better at. So this is another example of communicating with Indigenous communities. I would like to know if you've given any thought, if you were in their shoes, what steps would you take to initially engage with this Indigenous community, and how would you continue to engage them throughout the project?
Okay. So if you have identified all the stages of your project, and one of them was exactly the dam, construction. So you should first, geographically identify, who is living there and who's going to get the impact on that. I think, there was already communication with some Inuit groups, and especially when they transferred the land, when they acquired all the, that. But in terms of what happened specifically with the Nunatsiavut government, there was not a lack of knowledge, but even Hydro-Quebec and other figures in Canada were promoting that the methyl mercury level will increase, as in effect, it will happen, and not giving enough importance on that. So, this is a technical issue, beyond what the project could give us, but there have been there other cases in Canada, for example, in North Kenora. I know this case on the mills that also it happened with mercury and other chemicals there. And I think it's deliberately what is happening. In many cases, they know that this is a pollutant. We know we have the World Organization, the Health Organization. We do have limits for this. And we know that there are procedures that they're already there, to clean the dam and to clean all the surface and the areas before flooding the area. So this is something that is, it's just beyond, or I would say, even First Nations. I've seen these cases, in any community when they have to do this kind of projects. So unfortunately, they're vulnerable, more than others. The knowledge, of the technicality, could actually give some setback, but I would say the right situation here, or the right solution intermediate, which is creating this study, and asking other experts to provide the real information of what will be the real environmental impact. But this was overlooked by Nalcor and the rest. So they simply just did the procedure, and it was absolutely different from other flooding procedures, from the dams here in Canada too. And then it created situations and conditions that were far worse than other projects, but they still insist, that these levels, are okay and they're expected for this kind of project. So it's a kind of a game, trying to compete with technicalities, and bringing some information here that it's measurable, so you can measure, the level of methyl mercury in the water, so it's nothing that you can hide. But unfortunately, that's how politics plays sometimes.
Just a generic question. What made you decide to pick this for your paper?
We were a very fortunate team that we all had a good previous work experience before starting our master's. And we considered using projects from our own background, from our own companies, but we could not fund them in literature or data, news articles and everything. And Daniela is involved with some activities also with oil and gas, and she knew about this project and came up with the idea, and we found it to be very engaging in getting to know better the situation here in Canada for mega projects and what we could learn about it.
Well, I'm not directly involved, I would say, I mean, just in this project, but I was seated, next to me was seated one of the project managers of one of the subcontractors for Muskrat Falls. So I work in oil and gas, I mean, several years. But when I heard, I mean, all the problems, I mean, they were coming, flowing, I mean, very naturally that, wow, this is a huge problem. This is a very interesting situation that is happening in our own country here. So what are we going to do? So how are we going to face this? I mean, how can we contribute, I mean, to improve, I mean, what is going on? So I didn't participate directly, but I heard everything. So, and I had, I mean, just interviews, I mean, with Gustavo, so, and sometimes, I mean, with them, so what's going on? So what's the level of communication? What's your real feedback, I mean, in terms of this sub-project that you have, I mean, and you are managing? And that's how we came with this. I mean, so we thought about big projects in Canada, for sure. So, and because we're supposed to have, I mean, a lot of experience, I mean, in hydro projects, and we do have. So, but this one is all over the news. So, since I moved to this country, so I've been watching and reading news about CBC, you know, and all is what is happening for Muskrat Falls. So, we wanted to show the reality. So, and with the facts, with the numbers, with statistics, and also what we believe, I mean, are the lessons learned.
The more we read about this project, the more fascinated we became about it, thinking, how could this happen? This is unbelievable. There is endless information about it, and I cannot believe that this is another hydro project like this can happen in Canada. On Professor Flyback's exhibit on the public inquiry that's going on for the Muskrat Falls, he presented a statistical analysis of energy projects throughout the world and mega projects, and which ones have a higher probability of going over budget and over schedule. And the two types that have a higher probability are nuclear, by far the highest, and hydro, which are the most used here in Canada. Solar is the one that is always on budget and on schedule. So maybe that's a hint for the future here.